You step into a garden lit only by torches and a bleeding moon. The scent of night jasmine is thick in the air, sweet enough to mask the rot of something buried deeper, fear, perhaps, or ambition. From within the palace walls, the faint pluck of a lyre rises like smoke. And then, suddenly, the music breaks. Someone is screaming. Before we plunge into the spiraling tragedy of Nero's rise, take a moment to join our growing historical community. Tap the like button if you're drawn to stories lost in time, subscribe for more cinematic journeys into the past, and let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I find it extraordinary that across centuries and continents we can still gather to ask the same question: how did it all go so wrong? Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus was not born a monster, but from the moment of his birth in 37 AD, he was ensnared in blood. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, was the sister of Caligula. Yes, that Caligula, and a great-granddaughter of Augustus. She was not merely imperial by blood, but imperial in instinct. Ambition curled through her like smoke, always reaching upward, always seeking the throne. Nero's father, the brutal and corrupt Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus, predicted his son would become a public ruin, and then promptly died, some said of dropsy, others whispered poison. Agrippina, widowed and exiled by her brother, survived. She always did, and when Caligula was murdered and her uncle Claudius rose to the purple, she returned, smiling, calculating, and ready to begin again. Rome, at the time, was no stranger to poison. It slipped into goblets during banquets, clung to feathers used for inducing vomit, and dripped quietly down the throats of emperors who trusted the wrong handmaid. But Agrippina wielded it like a sculptor uses a chisel, deliberately, surgically, with an artist's patience. First, she rid herself of rivals. Then she married Claudius, her uncle, an act scandalous even in a city built on scandal. In 49 AD, Nero, still Lucius Domitius, was adopted by the emperor. His name was changed, his lineage legitimized, and his path cleared. He married Claudius's daughter Octavia, becoming both stepson and son-in-law to the emperor. And in 54 AD, after a suspicious serving of mushrooms, Claudius died convulsing in his bed. Agrippina wept. Rome looked away. Nero, at just 16, was crowned emperor of the known world. At first, he was adored. He cut taxes. He banned secret trials. When asked to sign an execution order, he murmured, "Would that I had never learned to write." These were the gestures of a golden prince, a new Augustus, sculpted in marble, draped in purple. But behind the delicate features and generous smiles was something more volatile, a hunger not for power, but for admiration. Nero was not a warrior. He was not a statesman. He was an artist. He longed to sing on stage, to recite his poetry before the masses, to be remembered not as a ruler, but as a performer elevated to divinity. He had been raised among silk and incense, taught by the philosopher Seneca and the praetorian Burrus. But even they could not restrain what stirred beneath. By his third year in power, the cracks began to show. Agrippina, the mother who had carved his path to glory, now found herself increasingly shut out of the palace. She demanded influence. He denied it. When she tried to sway him, he mocked her. Some whispered of incestuous tension. Others said he simply feared her. Whatever the truth, he decided to rid himself of her. His first attempt was theatrical. A boat rigged to collapse at sea. Agrippina survived, swimming ashore in her sodden robes, greeted by terrified fishermen who recognized the empress emerging from the waves like a fury. Nero, unnerved, tried again. This time, it was simpler. A blade, a soldier, and silence. When he was told she had begged the assassin to strike her womb, the very place where Nero had once grown, he did not flinch. And yet, for all this, Rome still applauded. In the years that followed, Nero immersed himself in music and vanity. He competed in chariot races. He forced senators to watch his performances. He wore disguises and prowled the streets at night, attacking strangers for sport. He was emperor, but he was also the audience, craving applause that echoed like thunder through the marble halls of his palaces. The year 64 AD brought the fire. It began near the Circus Maximus and raged for 9 days. When it was over, 10 of Rome's 14 districts lay in ashes. People wandered the ruins barefoot, clutching relics of their old lives, weeping in the soot. And where was Nero? Some said he stood on a rooftop strumming his lyre and singing of Troy's destruction. Others claimed he was miles away. The truth is blurred. Roman historians hated him, and truth often drowns in hatred. But perception was enough. Nero, the performer emperor, became Nero the arsonist. Desperate to deflect blame, he pointed the finger at a strange Eastern sect, the Christians. The executions were spectacular. They were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs. They were crucified. Some were coated in pitch and lit on fire to serve as torches for Nero's garden parties. Guests would sip wine and murmur compliments while the human candles screamed behind them. And still, Nero sang. Still, he built his golden house, a vast palace complex of gold leaf, fountains, and frescoed halls, rising from the ruins of Rome. A colossal statue of himself towered outside, arms stretched as if to embrace the world. But the applause was dying. Seneca, his old tutor, was ordered to take his own life. Burrus vanished. His wife, Octavia, was exiled, then executed after false accusations. The court was now filled with flatterers and cowards, none willing to tell the emperor that the people no longer loved him. Love, once lost, curdles into fear, and fear in Rome breeds conspiracy. Whispers echoed through the baths and the Senate halls. The gods, it seemed, had tired of Nero. The stars above began to shift, and somewhere beyond the city, a man sharpened his blade, not for glory, but for a reckoning. The artist had built an empire from illusion, but illusions cannot bleed. And soon the curtain would fall. The banquet was lavish. Gold goblets clinked, garlands of myrrh perfumed the air, and the low hum of conversation echoed beneath the coffered ceilings. Then, without warning, a boy coughed, spasmed, and fell. The scent of roasted meat could no longer mask the sharp metallic tang of bile and fear. Britannicus was only 14 years old. He died before his wine cooled. The walls of Nero's Rome did not echo with silence. They echoed with the sound of careful footsteps, whispered plots, and dying breath. By the time Britannicus collapsed at that dinner table in 55 AD, his fate had long been sealed. Nero had ascended to the throne just months before, and Britannicus, as the biological son of Claudius, still held a claim to power, one his older stepbrother could not risk. Some believed Nero poisoned the boy personally. Others pointed to Locusta, the empire's most notorious poisoner, a woman with a private laboratory and imperial protection. The poison was designed not to kill immediately, but to act slowly, as if by disease. But something went wrong, or perfectly right. Britannicus took one sip, clutched his stomach, and collapsed in violent convulsions. Nero, seated at the head of the table, remained calm. "He suffers from the falling sickness," he told his guests. "It will pass." It didn't. Britannicus died in agony at his brother's feet, his face pale, his limbs trembling. The feast resumed. Nero had not simply removed a rival. He had crossed a threshold. The death of Britannicus unchained something within him. If he could murder blood, he could murder anyone. And the next target would not be a passive boy, but the woman who had once ruled from the shadows, his mother. Agrippina had groomed her son for the throne, but power had a cost, and Nero no longer wanted to pay it. At first, he tried to isolate her. He removed her guards, then her titles. He moved her into another palace. Still, her influence lingered like a stain. especially among the Senate and military officers who remembered her as the architect of Nero's rise. He needed a cleaner solution. The assassination plot that followed reads like a piece of dark theater. Nero invited Agrippina to a celebration at the Bay of Baiae and gifted her a magnificent ship for her return. What she didn't know was that the ship had been specially constructed to collapse at sea. That night, under a sky of stars, the boat's canopy was rigged to fall and crush her. When that failed, the hull split, and Agrippina was thrown into the black water. A servant drowned. Agrippina swam ashore. Rumors spread that she walked barefoot into her villa, dripping and silent, asking only for her dagger. Nero panicked. He sent a tribune to finish the job. It is said that when the soldier entered her chamber, Agrippina bared her chest and declared, "Strike here, in the womb that bore him." She was stabbed in the stomach, her body burned without ceremony. Nero, upon hearing the deed was done, collapsed into hysterics. He locked himself in his chambers for days, crying and fearing her ghost would haunt him. But no ghost came, only applause. For a time, Rome accepted the death. Nero staged public games, announced that Agrippina had plotted his death, and filled the streets with spectacle. But something in him shifted. He was no longer content to be loved. He demanded worship. He dressed as Apollo. He performed on stage. He sang before the Senate. Senators, terrified of execution, clapped until their hands bled. Even his marriage became performance. Octavia, his wife, the daughter of Claudius, had long been a symbol of legitimacy. But Nero found her dull, barren, and politically inconvenient. He exiled her first. Then, when the public begged for her return, he accused her of adultery. She was imprisoned and eventually executed. Her head, severed and salted, was sent to Nero's mistress, Poppaea Sabina, as a gift. Poppaea was everything Octavia wasn't. Beautiful, cunning, dangerous. Nero adored her, until he didn't. One night, during a violent argument, Nero kicked her in the stomach. She was pregnant. She died from the blow. Rome mourned. Nero, in his grief, arranged for her to be embalmed in rare spices and buried with imperial honors. But grief, in Nero's court, was always a pose. One week he wept for her, the next he married a boy named Sporus, had him castrated, and dressed him in Poppaea's clothes. He called him his wife. Madness had become routine, and then came the fire. It began in the summer of 64 A.D., deep in the merchant districts where the wooden shops and narrow alleys made for easy kindling. Wind drove the flames. Panic took hold. For 9 days the city burned, swallowing temples, homes, and statues older than the empire itself. Nero was not in the city when it began. But he returned in haste, opening his gardens to the homeless and coordinating relief. Yet rumors spread fast. Too fast. Some claimed his men had blocked off firefighting efforts. Others said they'd seen torches thrown into shops. The most damning rumor of all, that Nero stood atop his palace dressed as a tragedian, singing of the fall of Troy while Rome collapsed beneath him. To survive the blame, Nero needed a scapegoat. He found one in the Christians, a small, secretive sect of Eastern mystics already mistrusted by the public. He declared them guilty of arson and sentenced them not just to death, but to spectacle. Some were torn apart by dogs, others were crucified. Still others were covered in tar and set alight in Nero's garden, serving as torches for his night parties. Guests wandered the manicured paths, sipping wine by human firelight. The empire had become a stage, and every death a performance. But the applause was fading. Senators whispered in private. Generals, once loyal, began to look elsewhere. The people, once dazzled, began to fear. Beneath the marble and music, Rome was rotting. The throne was still warm, but the poison had seeped deep. And deep beneath the surface another fire was beginning to smolder, one that could not be extinguished with song. The next time the audience turned to Nero, they would not be clapping. The floor was dirt. not marble, not polished stone or imported tile, just cracked, dry earth that crumbled beneath his knees. Outside, dogs barked. Somewhere in the distance, Rome still breathed. But here, in this collapsing villa northeast of the city, the last emperor of the Julio-Claudian line clutched a dagger with shaking hands, too afraid to use it. Nero was not yet dead, but he was already forgotten. The end did not come as a sword through the chest or a mob at the gates. It came slower, quieter, with rumors, with letters, with generals who no longer answered his messengers. It began when the provinces, Gaul, Hispania, Africa, stopped cheering, when legions began shouting the names of new emperors. Nero heard it all, and still he performed. He had always believed he was more than mortal. His portraits showed him wreathed in sunbeams, his statues taller than gods. But by 68 A.D., the god emperor had become a ghost in his own palace. That spring, Gaius Julius Vindex, the governor of Gaul, declared rebellion, not in his own name, but for another, Servius Sulpicius Galba, governor of Hispania, a man older, sterner, with a soldier's bearing. Nero, in his vanity, dismissed it. "I will crush them," he said, "and afterward I shall return to Rome and perform my latest poem." He promised a triumph. He promised music. But no triumph came. One by one, the provinces fell away. Even the Praetorian Guard, the elite force sworn to protect him, began to shift. Bribed by senators and offered gold by Galba, they deserted him like actors exiting a doomed play. When the Senate met on June 8th, they declared Nero hostis publicus, enemy of the Roman people. A sentence of death was now legal. His name was to be struck from inscriptions, his face scratched from coins, his memory erased. In the palace, servants scattered. Doors were left open. Guards vanished. Nero, desperate, ran to the quarters of one of his few remaining freedmen, Phaon. There, barefoot and cloaked in rags, he was smuggled from the city beneath the cover of night. The journey was pitiful. A handful of slaves. No guards, no honor. The man who once ruled the world was now hiding in thickets along dusty roads, listening to every hoofbeat like it carried death. When they reached Phaon's villa, it was not a palace. It was rotting, unkept. Nero curled up in a cellar lined with old straw, muttering to himself, "They will come," he whispered. "They will beg me to return." But no one came. At dawn, he was told the Senate had voted for his execution, that Galba had entered Rome, that the horsemen were already on their way. He asked for a grave to be dug. He asked for poison, but the supply was gone. He asked someone to kill him. No one moved. It was then he took the dagger. The same man who had ordered the deaths of his mother, his wife, his brother, now found himself unable to lift the blade to his own throat. He begged. He sobbed. "Have I neither friend nor foe left?" he cried. It was Epaphroditus, his secretary, who finally helped him. A nudge, a push. The blade pierced shallowly into Nero's neck just as the horsemen arrived. The first of them entered the courtyard, shouting, "Is it finished?" Hearing the voice, Nero responded with a whisper, "Too late. This is fidelity." He died moments later. The villa was silent. Nero's body was not given the funeral rites of an emperor. No triumph, no state burial. His corpse was burned hastily and interred in the family tomb of the Domiti Ahenobarbi, arranged by a few loyal freedmen and his former nurse. In time, weeds would grow where the emperor had fallen. But death was not the end of Nero. The Senate declared damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. His name was chiseled off monuments, his statues pulled down and melted, his likeness erased from public records. Officially, he had never existed. Yet memory is a strange thing. Whispers soon returned. In the East, men claimed Nero had survived, that he was living in hiding, raising armies, preparing to reclaim his throne. 3 separate impostors would arise in the coming decades, each claiming to be the lost god-emperor. Crowds gathered, some wept, others shouted. The myth of Nero, twisted and terrible, refused to die, because the truth was unbearable. Rome had not been destroyed by invaders or civil war. It had not fallen to plague or famine. It had decayed from within, crumbling under the weight of its own illusions. Nero had not simply ruled it, he had embodied it. The beauty, the spectacle, the cruelty. And when the people finally turned away, when they stopped clapping, it was not just Nero who died. An entire age ended with him. The last words he ever spoke, according to legend, were these: Qualis artifex pereo. What an artist dies in me! No monument marks the place, no hymn is sung, just silence. And somewhere, buried beneath the weeds, the echoes of a final performance no one stayed to watch.